مشاهدينا في هذه الحلقة من برنامج The Capital. ضيفي هو Mr. Robert McFarlane, former National Security Advisor. Mr. Robert McFarlane, you're welcome. We're supposed to do this interview a long time ago, maybe a year ago. Then coronavirus happened. I'm glad to meet you, at least via Zoom. So you are most welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's kind of you to reschedule again. My colleague, Admiral Mike Hewitt, was extremely pleased by his opportunity to interview with you last December, perhaps, but it was very kind of you to make time.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for your time, sir. So we're going to start with my first question is about the nuclear deal. Is it a task that the Biden administration sees a continuation of the Obama administration policy toward the nuclear deal?
Well, largely so, I believe. There have been changes, as you know, in the situation in the Middle East. However, I think these have been, for the most part, positive. That is, the Abraham Accords and so forth. And I must say, I'm extremely impressed by the progress that's been made in our focus, our part of industry, by the United Arab Emirates and, well, there are many other very impressive gains made by countries throughout the regions in the past year.
So this administration seemed to be submissive and indolent with Iran, which has unleashed its hand of terror in the region. Do you think so, Mr. McFarlane?
Well, I believe that the public announcements indicate that they want to try to get Iran first to fulfill the terms of the JCPOA and then perhaps to improve from the American perspective Iran's behavior with regard to its support for surrogates, Hezbollah, Hamas, others in Iraq, and I wish them well. I think that's going to be difficult to do. They are already not in compliance with the existing terms of the JCPOA, so I wish them well, but I think that's unlikely to meet the terms being set by the Biden administration.
Mr. McFarlane, the manufacture of uranium and missile materials continues in Iran, and it's threatening international peace and security in the region. Iran has proven that it's not committed to stop the producing of nuclear bomb. What will be the solution in that matter?
Well, I think Iran is simply trying to change the rules, the conditions established by the International Atomic Energy Agency for both enrichment. Iran is stating publicly that they intend to exceed those limits. Well, that suggests a commitment to turning uranium into being suitable for a weapon. And that's outrageous and certainly unjustified. Well, this kind of behavior doesn't indicate a serious purpose in reopening the negotiations, but we'll see. I'm not encouraged so far.
Khamenei says in public that no one can stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear bomb. What does it mean, this rhetorical escalation, and they have no limit for their project?
Well, it's an outrageous prospect. There's no need for Iran to have nuclear weapons. The opportunities for Iran are very substantial, as you know. The gains being made by the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, as well as Saudi Arabia, Egypt as well. So the trend is quite promising for the countries in the region. And of course, Iran has its own natural resources, oil, gas, and other products. So it's in a position to be able to advance the quality of life for all Iranians if they would simply stop this theocratic crusade. I don't think it's justified, and I think there'll be a consensus among regional parties, countries, that the United States position is correct, and the standards established in the JCPOA ought to be honored, and the negotiations should resume.
What do you think the fate of the harsh sanctions was made by the Trump administration on Iran, which has affected the mullah regime? How would the Biden administration can deal with it today? They're gonna delete it or what?
Well, I think the Trump legacy offers the Biden administration leverage. That is, those are conditions that Iran will insist upon. However, if there's any change from the U.S. side, what will be given in return on the Iranian side by way of ceasing its support for subordinate activities such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and its crusade to drive a wedge between Sunni and Shia world. And well, there's so many blatant violations of the agreement itself that all in all, if you're looking for good faith on the Iranian side, it simply isn't there. There's no evidence of goodwill and serious intent here.
So, Mr. McFarlane, do you think that the Iranian regime from inside is fragile today? Especially there is a popular resentment against Khamenei regime. And do you think that Biden administration can stop at the human rights in Iran and help the people will to change the regime in total?
Well, I think that the decline of the quality of life in Iran is measurable and is very evident in televised reports from the grassroots of what is going on in the country. This regime has been flagrant in using the wealth that it has for foreign conflicts and for seeking to expand its influence beyond Iran's borders, but doing nothing to benefit the quality of life for Iranians, whether it's education or housing or healthcare or law enforcement. It's a record of despotism that is truly unjustified and against the interest of the people. Will the people rise up? Of course, I'm not in a position to judge that. I think if there are parties in Iran, I'm talking now about leaders, opposition leaders that were qualified and experienced in forming an opposition party. One might imagine that an effort to call for elections or similar moves might happen, but I don't see evidence of that right now, and have no basis for believing there's going to be an uprising anytime soon. It's justified, but it requires leadership.
Mr. McFarlane, if you were today the national security advisor in these days, how do you act in the foreign policy affairs, and what will be your opinion about the Biden administration in that sector?
Well, I think that there is a substantial body of agreement between our two parties here in the U.S. that politics generally stops at the water's edge, we say. And so I think that the Biden team will agree with most of the policies that the Trump administration had adopted. I think that our purpose is to promote our interest, of course, however, not at the expense of any foreign party. We have no animus even to the revolution of Iran. However, we do have substantial disagreements, and they include everything from human rights to violation of the sovereignty of regional countries nearby. And these are negotiable, and yet it requires goodwill on both sides. And I just don't see any evidence that the Khamenei regime is interested in talking to us. They refer to us almost every day as the great Satan, and this is not a foundation for productive negotiation.
Another question concerning the Middle East. President Biden didn't contact yet. He didn't call the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman. How do you see, what is the compass that can govern the relationship between Saudi Arabia and USA in this term?
Well, I've been surprised and disappointed that there hasn't been a greeting, a exchange of congratulations, if you will. Saudi Arabia clearly is an extremely important ally for the United States, and there is really no justification for any hostility at all. I think policies will perhaps change. Already announced a lessened American participation in Yemen and that conflict, and yet I think, and this is a personal opinion, that it's time for the countries of the Arabian Peninsula to see the benefit that is coming already from the Abraham Accords and to develop call it security dimension, an extension of those accords. That is, personally, I have always thought that conceptually it was makes good sense to form a regional security organization comprising the Gulf cooperation countries as well as Saudi Arabia, perhaps Egypt, call it a NATO of the Middle East, so that the countries have confidence that any interference with any one member would be answered by all of the members, as our current alliance with NATO requires. And this would be the solid, unified basis of deterrence, that is, demonstrating to Iran that there is no gain to be made by aggression or interfering in the affairs of any of the GCC countries, Saudi as well as Egypt. So it's time for every country to recognize that this is a time of opportunity, both economically, but also in terms of national security and stability. And we have larger issues, all of us, and a common interest in deterring the behavior of China that is seeking to enhance its own influence beyond its borders. And it's very much in the interest of the GCC countries and our interest to nurture closer cooperation politically, economically, and militarily. And I believe that will be the course for the Biden administration. There's no hostility that I see from the people who have been nominated at the State Department and the White House that come to office with any hostility at all. Indeed, goodwill, I believe, will prevail.
This leads me to a question about UAE, and UAE and USA have a sustainable relationship and strategic one. So they coordinate in the fight or in combating terrorism. How will the Biden administration deal with the traditional ally like UAE especially after that they postponed the arms purchase deal?
Well, I think this is just a small, we would call it hiccup on the road. Our relationship with the UAE is a very, very strong one. From Ambassador Otaiba here in Washington to His Royal Highness, the mutual goodwill and benefits are growing every day. I personally focus a lot on the industrial development of the UAE, and it is just breathtaking. The successes that have been made, for example, in completing successfully the Oraka project to construct 4 civil nuclear power plants. It's done extremely professionally, and it provides evidence throughout the region, indeed the world, that this is a country that has vision, that has goals, that provide for opportunity for the people of the Emirates, and without hostility toward the United States or Saudi, indeed improving ties every day with countries of the region. We are very, very grateful and admiring of United Arab Emirates. It is a model for the region, and one with whom we intend to broaden our relationships, I'm sure, under the Biden administration. And these small hiccups along the way will pass, I'm sure.
I heard someone or some analyst state that Obama administration did not answer why Iran would be allowed to enrich uranium and prevent it from being imposed on Saudi Arabia and UAE. Do you think that if Iran have a nuclear program, does it has to be also to Saudi Arabia and UAE? Don't they have the right to have it so also?
Well, there is simply no need. Why does a country develop a nuclear capability? Well, it's out of being threatened by its neighbors and needing a basis for deterring aggression, so forth. But if the countries come together and there's strong evidence that the relationships are very sound and getting better every day, then coming together to form a collective security organization makes great sense. It's in everybody's interest, and you gain from having a host of countries all committed to common goals of deterring Iran and being able to aid each other promptly in the event of Iranian aggression. So I think the Emirates, as far as I can tell, are very keen to avoid hostilities. They don't seek to become a dominant regional power. They're doing very well by focusing on industry and providing better opportunity for the Emirati people. I'm optimistic about the region, and I think, however, that we have to get beyond this condition of hostility that's coming from Iran toward the region and toward their bilateral relations with us. But I am not encouraged by the first steps on the Iranian side so far.
There is lots of challenges for Biden. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. Some analysts say that Biden will fall in the trap of Iran in these countries. What would be the strategy of Biden to stop the support of these militia like Hezbollah you mentioned before, in the start of this interview, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, Houthis in Yemen?
Well, this will be a very sensitive, very difficult negotiation between the U.S. and Iran because precisely of the role being played by Hezbollah, Hamas, and militias in Iraq. And it is complicated by the presence here and there in Syria of Russia and others who are self-interested and contribute to instability of the region. I think that this will be a troubled area in the relationships between the U.S. and the countries of the region. But I think it will be overcome. I think after a period of hope and optimism toward Iran, that the Biden administration will be able to see that this revolutionary idea that goes back 40 years is not going to change. I hope that it does. I doubt that it will. And that the interests of the United States are to be supportive of the Syrian people, the Iraqi people, and all of the Arab states in the region. We have no basis for hostility toward any of them, and we are prepared once Iran ceases its subversion of these countries from Lebanon to Iraq and supporting conflict in Yemen. There's no basis for Iranian activities right now in those countries. And so I think the Biden administration will engage with Iran with hope, but not optimism. And we will go back to essentially the kind of standoff and deterrence that existed in the past 4 years. I hope for better. I'm not optimistic that Iran will change.
Mr. McFarlane, what about Turkey, which is heading toward damaging stability in the region, especially in Libya and Syria? And Turkey has not acted as an ally for America, of America and NATO. Does Biden pay attention to holding Turkey or Erdogan accountable and stopping its excesses?
Well, I think it has been disappointing for our country to see a NATO ally behave as Turkey has in the last more than 4 years. It's not helping the economy of Turkey. It is interfering in other countries, notably those you mentioned, Libya in particular, without justification, and sowing the seeds of instability throughout the region, has made contracts for very high technology weapon systems with Russia, and refused use of bases by the United States occasionally here and there, and as well as been hostile toward the Kurdish population, and a series of activities that are not justified at all, nor are they really improving the lot of the Turkish people, who have begun to see the economy go against them in minor ways, but nonetheless, the trend is changing inside Turkey. So I think we're going to have to try to reset the goalposts and engage with Turkey and persuade them that their own self-interest is better served by remaining loyal to their NATO obligations, to their bilateral ties with us being stable and mutually beneficial in trade and national security and regionally, and back away from efforts to expand their influence beyond their borders. This is not in their interest nor in the interest of stability in the region.
Mr. McFarlane, our episode has ended, so I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for being our guest. I appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure. I tend to talk too much, so I apologize, but I wish you well. I'll look forward to maybe another time in the future.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Inshallah.